Welcome to episode number 1 of Ignite the Calling. And so to lay the groundwork of what we're going to do in this show is simply build it around some concepts or some principles to help us build not only a business that we want, but also build the business around a lifestyle that's going to serve us long term. And so when we build it from that lens, right, we first have to figure out what is it that we want in our life. What do we want to cultivate with our business? What do we want our business to provide for us? And so, what I have distilled it down and what I see most people also frequently want comes down to what I simply call the 4 quadrants of freedom, right? Whatever, it could be a goofy name, but really, if you think about it, right, we want to create time freedom so we can spend more time doing the hobbies that we want, the activities that we like, spending time with family, kids, friends, working out, whatever it may be. Most of us, right, don't want to create a business that has us working 24/7, 16 hours a day, right? Like the Hermosis who, he said since slaves work 24/7, he should be able to too. But at the same time, right, he doesn't want to have any children, right? And so those of us who do want to have kids, do want to cultivate more experiences outside of business, we need that business to also serve a capacity of allowing us to have that time flexibility, right? Not having a boss tell us when we can show up to work, or when we can own some of our own time, right? That's the biggest thing I've always disliked. And it's not saying that a business and having employees, right, that we have to do work, right? But creating a business that not only allows you to afford the time flexibility to go to the doctors when you need to, but also your employees to go to the doctors when they need to, instead of checking in from 9 to 5, getting permission. Hey, I want to go on vacation 3 months from now. Like, am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to own some of my own time, right? So that kind of takes care of the time freedom, right? It's obviously not saying like we're the 4-hour work week and we're never going to work and we're going to just optimize to just, build this huge thing and just have a pipe dream of never really working, right? That title is very misleading and is something that isn't true, right? Anyone who's built anything great has had to put in a lot of time, but it's not necessarily about that we don't put in a lot of time. It's owning when we can take the time off, right? And so second to that is location freedom. And so when we were scaling up our online fitness company, we got stuck in this mindset of scaling at all costs, right? Like growth was the number one metric that we were pursuing. And once we hit, higher and higher numbers, team grew more and more, we realized that we really started to lose the location freedom in the sense of, we always have to be on daily stand-ups. We're always listening to calls. We're always looking at everyone's operations, right? From Monday at 7 a.m. till Friday at 8 p.m., we are essentially stuck to our laptop, right? Because we built our business not with the lens of how can we create location freedom. Yes, we're online, but you get to a certain point where you're so bogged down all the time that even thinking about traveling and doing the work from a different location just starts to sound exhausting, right? And so with whatever business also, right, it's not saying that we can't have a brick and mortar. We can't have a business that's tied to a physical place. We'll kind of talk a little bit more on that here in a bit. But, right, we want to be building it in a way that does afford us that location freedom, right? That we aren't strapped to showing up to that brick and mortar every single day, open and close. And then the bottom two, right, is income scalability and income stability, right? And so when we're building a business, right, we want to have that time and location freedom, but we also want to be in something that we feel like with the units of time that we're putting in, that we have the capacity to scale it up as high as we want to, right? And balancing that between scaling income and time and location freedom, right? Like that is the secret sauce that we had been missing for so many years, right? We got so focused on that quadrant of income scalability that we weren't paying attention to everything that we were building surrounding it that was eating up our time and location freedom. And then lastly is income stability. And I think this is one that's super not talked about because it's not sexy, right? In the online business world especially, the Hermoses and Cole Gordons and whoever else, right? There's always just this large emphasis on growth, and not a large emphasis on what does it look like to create stability, right? When you build this machine, that's a very linear machine. It grows by more and more people coming on board. It always requires us to be selling ahead of expenses by a couple weeks, a month, right? That's not affording us stability. Stability looks like, hey, if I take 2 weeks off, I'm still producing revenue, and more importantly, I'm still producing profit that affords me to still be able to focus on time and location freedom, right? And so we can have income scalability, but if it's super volatile and we want to have a family, we want to not be stress sleeping multiple nights a week, right? Hoping that we get that next sale, only feeling happy when that balance sheet is going up, and up, right? If we want to have that, we also have to be focusing on scalability. Or another way to think of that is minimizing risk, right? We want to be able to afford growth, but at each stage, we also need to be thinking of what does it look like to minimize the risk, which is essentially increasing your stability, right? And so that's the 4 quadrants that we are saying, hey, this is a non-negotiable for me in my life. This is a non-negotiable for how I want to live with my family. My selfish desires of growing a business for status or fame or notoriety, right, does not supersede these 4 quadrants, right? And so much, of business development, people who, biz gurus and coaches who, are teaching you how to grow your business. So much of it's wrapped around just income scalability, because obviously most people, when they aren't making the income that they want, right, the logical or, the biggest pain point is that I need to make more income, right? But the reality is what we're not actually searching is just like more income. Sure, maybe we want to buy something, but deep down underneath all of that, we're actually searching for income stability, right? We don't want to get that thing and then have to lose it a year later, 2 years later, because we built something that was very risky and very volatile, right? Really what we're all searching is for that income stability, which is not sexy, but it's true, right? We want to make more money so we can ultimately, what our brain is concluding, what our brain is trying to problem solve for is if I make more money, hopefully I will be more stable, right? And so those are the 4 quadrants we want to build our life around, the non-negotiables. But the only way that we do that is with the value or impact we create for others, right? We aren't getting what we want from life if we're not creating that value and impact for others. And so, not everything has to be, built around, being Mother Teresa, being Gandhi, being the best helper, right? Value can be any mode that improves somebody's quality of life, whether it's subjectively, whether it's physically, whether it's time, whether it's energy, whether it's efficiency, right? And finding where you fit into that puzzle with your strengths and your knowledge is going to be the easiest way to veer off into that, right? So what I mean by that is there's a great book called, I think it's called So Good or So Great They Can't Ignore You or something like that, or something along those lines. And the whole thinking concept, principle behind that is we are most likely going to create a large jump in how we produce value for others when what we do is built upon the knowledge and skill set that we already have. Meaning, maybe I've spent 20, 30 years being an accountant. But then all of a sudden, when I'm 50, I like yoga, right? But I have no experience opening a yoga studio versus people who have been in that space for 15, 20 years, have worked at a lot of yoga studios, right? Have maybe managed yoga studios. That person who's managed it is going to have a much easier and efficient time to be able to build that business and create the value and impact that they want to with their studio, right? And so value and impact that we create, right, is what's going to afford us those 4 pieces, quadrants to freedom in our life. And so when we look at that, though, so now we know, right, okay, this is what I want. To get that, I have to create value and impact. But now, hopefully, I can give you some lens or idea of what you can build that is going to provide the stability, and also have a very high probability of being something that lasts, right? So I can sell something on how to run Facebook ads right now, right? But in 2 years from now, it's going to look completely different. And so with that, right, maybe I'll find quick success. Maybe I'll scale up quickly. But the problem is in 2 years from now, I have to reinvent the wheel, right? I have to come up with some new product to offer. And so that leads to the first kind of core pillar of looking at, like, how am I building my business? And these are essentially straight from Jeff Bezos, right? Like, these are the 4 pieces that he looks in a business that he's either building or acquiring, so on and so forth. And so I expanded on these a little bit, but really the first one is, will the fulfillment, habit, or desire always be the same? And so for fitness, right, when we have our fitness company, that fills a couple of these quadrants, right, or these pillars for growing your business, in the sense, in this one especially, right, how you get healthier is always going to be the same, right? You're always going to have to increase your strength. You're always going to have to control what you're eating, whether you do GLP-1s or not. At some point, right, you have to still come and abide by those 2 principles. The GLP is going to get you to undereat, but long term, if you're not paying attention to how much you're undereating, you're not strength training, you're going to have a lot of muscle wasting, and thus you are going to, if you ever stop or whatever, you're going to find multiple years later that your metabolism's non-existent. You go to eat more and you're still going to be gaining weight, right? And so all that to circle back, the little side tangent there, is that if I can find something where fulfillment, the habit or desire, right, desire of being healthy, the habit of being healthy, and the fulfillment of becoming healthy all stays the same long term, right, I'm building a business with a very good foundation, right? I'm not going to have to constantly change the product like I would if I'm selling you something to optimize your Facebook ads, right? And then the second piece, right, is unique intellectual properties. And so this would be where our fitness business falls short, in the sense of it's very commodity based, right? It's not anything unique. Everything with fitness, getting healthier, it's the same across the board. I'm not going to come in and reinvent the wheel. Maybe somebody comes in with, the keto fad or some new fad, right? But that will ultimately fade, right? Because it's not built upon the true principles, right? So again, somebody might find great success quickly with becoming a vegetarian. There'll always be probably some, market for people becoming vegetarian. But again, at the end of the day, it's not something unique to your business that you own, that you've brought to life with your own intellectual skill set and knowledge that is further than your competitors, right? And so one of my buddies is designed a shoe. It's the best shoe I've ever put my foot into. And he's able to create that unique intellectual property because he's spent so much time understanding the ins and outs of every single shoe with his shoe review company, right? And so with that, he can bring some real unique intellectual properties to the product. On the other side of that, right, the fulfillment, the habit, desire of, we're always going to need shoes, and we're always going to want to buy a shoe that's optimal for our foot, especially if you train hard, right? He's locking in those 2 pieces, right? So fulfillment, habit, desire the same, unique intellectual properties, decreases your probability of creating, a very saturated market like fitness is, right? And then ability to scale across large space, right? So one downfall to a brick and mortar is that your capacity to scale and sell to people is typically limited within a 5-mile radius, right? On average, your repeat customers are going to be within 5 miles. It's not saying that you can't grow an awesome brick and mortar business, right? But if you want that kind of unlimited potential of scalability, right, you can't be locked to a geographical location. So that's where our online fitness, right, we could sell that to anyone across the world, right? We've sold people in Australia, Italy, UK, right? We're in the States. And let's say for my buddy's shoe, right, that shoe can be sold anywhere across the world, right? So for the fitness thing, right, we have 2 out of the 3 so far. The shoe currently has 3 out of the 4. Then the last piece is high return on leverage or capital, right? Not with linear growth with employees. So what I mean by that is, so this is where our fitness business really lacked, in the sense of, for us to grow, it was always this layering out, this linear growth of more people, right? If I want to grow more, I have to get another layer to the business. I have to bootstrap on, add on another whole layer to the onion if we're going to grow, right? So there's not much leverage with that. And it also comes with a lot more risk, right? So if I'm building a business that's always predicated upon, if we're growing, I need more people, right? It's not preparing us for an inevitable quarter, inevitable year where we don't grow, or maybe we shrink, right? So then we're running the risk of, well, how much do I want to take on to keep growing this business, or the potential of keep growing this business? I'm essentially saying, hey, how much do I want to gamble, banking on that we will get back to a place of growth? Because if I let go of these people and then we get back to another place of growth, now I have to retrain everyone. When I let go of people, we tend to lose momentum in our company. And that's always going to make it harder to crawl out and grow again. And as you maybe get out of the hole and grow again, you're going to run into the same problem where you're creating this linear growth, which is also going to create a linear downsize. And so can we create something that allows us to bake in more stability, bake in more value given with more systems, more operations, maybe more capital, right? So for an example would be, one that is really, really the best example of this would be a CRM, right? So something like Go High Level or HubSpot, whatever, if you've used any of those, right? That has such a high return on leverage / capital with technology, right? Where the value is getting layered out thousands and thousands of times, but that growth and layering of growth is not predicated upon, we always need, for 1 unit of growth, we need 1 more unit of employees, right? And so that allows them, right? Let's say they have a large, they don't grow a lot that year, right? Or a lot of people leave because there's a new CRM, right? They still most likely have a lot of profit. They most likely don't need to downsize right away. Most likely, right? They just need to focus on getting back to number 1 and number 2, right? Increasing the quality of the fulfillment, speaking to the desires, right? Like with ClickFunnels not being as good as Go High Level anymore, right? They have the option of, do we become as good or better than Go High Level to get back to where we were, right? And doing that isn't necessarily meaning that we have to downsize to do that, right? We can most likely, if we still have enough profit, enough revenue, maybe it's leaner, right? But we can reinvent. We don't have to let people go and go on this continuous cycle of hiring and firing based off growth or no growth, right? So if we can hit those 4, right, that's what's going to give us the highest probability to be able to own those, the time, location, the or the time freedom, the location freedom, the income scalability, and the income stability, right? For many years to come, right? So it's like we could create something fast and quick, right? But again, if it's something that's always going to be changing, it's very saturated, right? It's not going to provide me those 4 quadrants for a very long time. And so for us, it's very much looking in the lens of, okay, I want to be able to create these things with the value that I'm giving to other people, and I want to be able to own those things for a long period of time so I can continue to build up my legacy in the sense of, the stability I'm providing for my family, my kids, maybe their, future kids as well, whatever it may be, not necessarily in an ego sense that I want to be remembered, but just in the fact that, your hard work, the time and effort that you've put in, right, the more that I can transcend you, right, that's a position, right, that holds a lot of value for a lot of people. It continues to lift the next generations up, right? So more and more people get out of poverty, more and more people can go and focus on building things that move the world forward, right, versus just trying to survive, right? And so if we know those 2 things, right, that we want this from our business and what we're doing with our precious time and energy. We want time freedom, location freedom, income scalability, income stability. We know we only get that with the value and impact that we create, but we want the vehicle that we're creating that value and impact with to be able to last a long time. Then we need to have something that has that fulfillment, habit, and desire that will always be the same, unique intellectual properties to it that allow us to create more of a blue ocean, ability to scale across large space and time domains, right? So we have that highest capacity to leverage our income or scale our income as high as we want. And then also a high return on leverage and capital, not necessarily linear growth with employees, right? If we know that, then we can at least look at like what are typically the life-changing desires that are never going to change with human nature, right? So these are bigger, right? Obviously, like the shoe is, somewhere in all of these things. But typically, all humans want these things to create a meaningful and happy life, right? So we all typically want to be a part of a mission or something bigger than ourselves, utilizing our passion, purpose, or personal gifts, right? And so, let's start with the first one, to be a part of a mission or something bigger than themselves. This doesn't necessarily mean we all have to be business owners, right? But if we are the business owner, we also have to look in the lens. If we're truly going to get employees bought in that want to stick around, right, we have to not just create a business where they feel like it's all dollars and cents and growth, right? We need to create a business that they are bought into the mission, right? They're bought into something that feels bigger than themselves. That's what's going to keep them inspired long term to give their utmost best, right? If somebody, gets in for income and eventually they hit more wealth than they need, if that was their initial intrinsic desire to join in the first place, right? Once that desire is hit, they have no desire to continue to show up as their best self, to nurture the mission, to nurture growing your business, right? And so whenever we're building the foundation, the framework for hiring our employees, building the culture of the business, we always have to be looking in the lens of, am I creating something that makes it feel like they are a part of something bigger than themselves, right? And us versus them, we're the small guys or the big guys. This is helping a lot of people. That will get your employees to show up day in and day out, willing to fight and claw and scratch for your business, right? Second to that is utilizing your passion, purpose, or personal gifts, right? And so at all points, it can be we are building something that's more built off of our passion, right? So, I'm really passionate about golf, but since I'm so terrible and I don't really have any skill sets, I shouldn't go and build something based off of that passion unless I truly see something that isn't necessarily predicated upon my playing capabilities, right? Versus somebody might feel their purpose is to, preach the word of God, right? They go and become a pastor. That can be filling that purpose-driven mission behind their work. Whereas maybe something like Bezos, right? He might not have felt that his purpose is to figure out how to create the world's largest online bookstore, right? But he might have been very much in a season of passion, right? And so we can align the both. They can be separate, what we're doing at that time, right? Or it can be something with your personal gift, right? So, do you just have some gift that you are world class in that you need to bring to the world, right? So if we can kind of look in the lens of what are those three, if we can blend all three, awesome. But we are most likely going to succeed more or better than somebody else who's trying to run the same business without having that passion, purpose, or the gift behind it, right? And so that's where, whenever we're looking at how do we set ourselves up to have the highest probability of success, of beating our competition, of being able to put in that extra hour of work, that extra leg than somebody else, right? If it's not filled with that passion, purpose, or your gift, you're most likely going to get outworked by somebody who does have that passion, purpose, or gift, right? People are always going to want to be healthy, strong, energetic, right? So the shoe, right? That feeds into that whole being healthy, strong, energetic. People are always going to, especially this one is going to grow so much more over the next decade of people craving real world connection or in real life experiences, right? With the AI continuing to grow, things getting more systematized and automated, people are going to crave that human connection more and more. And I think truly human real world experiences, creating places that people can go and have more connection consistently. Like our friends, they're building this sauna and cold plunge place, right? Where you get a membership. That's fantastic, right? It's a communal spot that we can go and connect and meet with people, but it isn't necessarily built around the fact that we're at a bar and we're drinking, right? Like I think more businesses that have that capacity to create in real life connection and experiences with people around you locally that isn't predicated upon just drinking, I think that is going to be something that there is a huge market for going forward, right? People are always going to be inspired to help others, right? Nonprofits, things that, so many people are not the Alex Hormozis who are just intrinsically motivated to hit $1 billion, right? Or be a billionaire, right? Many more people are much more intrinsically desired to help others. And in fact, like that is something that is hardwired into increasing long-term meaning and joy than just being able to hoard and collect. And now, obviously, he does creates a tremendous amount of value for people along the way. He's not selfish in any regards. He gives out so much value. But he also has the level that he's done it at, there's also that very large driving factor of how big can I grow, right? And so many people, most people are not driven by that. So people are always going to be driven by helping others, and that's going to create more sustained meaning than, winning for an example, right? They call this the arrival fallacy of like, when I get there, I'm going to be happy and everything will be bliss. And so you see people like the Michael Jordans, the Michael Phelps, the Lindsey Vonns, who hit this, seemingly Mount Olympus that next to nobody hits. And they all talk about the depression and the lows afterwards, right? Because at the end of the day, there's no real lasting impact on someone when you do those things, right? Sure, they have a moment of like they celebrate with you, then they go back to their day and day, and they are surrounded by the people that truly matter to them, right? We can all name, right, on one hand, like who are the top 3 people that have impacted your life the most, but we can't name the 1985 Heisman Trophy winner or Super Bowl winner, right? Or gold medal in some sport in the Olympics, right? And so that's where, you get back to this tribalism that we have in us, the tribes, the hunter and gatherers, that we, for our survival, needed to be able to collaborate, support one another. And because of that, was so vital to our survival, right? It lit up all of these places of increased dopamine, increased satisfaction, increased meaning, increased joy, right? And so it's the same thing like when you have a family, right? Like helping your family, helping your kids, right, is going to bring you so much more long-term sustained joy and be so much more meaningful to you than the dollars and cents that you acquire, right? Right. Everyone's going to want to increase financial stability. Nobody wants to be worrying about where the next dollar is coming from, paying the next bills, right? So if you can help people increase financial stability, there's always going to be a place to give that value, right? Spending more time with family and friends. So if you can help them create a business that allows them to have more time, more financial stability, allows them to spend more time being healthy, strong, and energetic, that is going to be something that is always going to have a large amount of capacity for people to build these types of businesses where they can build it. The fulfillment's always going to essentially stay the same. In some regards, most regards, right, you're going to be able to scale that to worldwide because everyone's going to want that. You are going to, if you are world class, you're most likely going to have some unique property to it. Let's say for like the Ray Dalios with Bridgewater, he was one of the first ones to adopt artificial intelligence. And so because of that, he had that unique intellectual property, right? He was able to create the world's largest hedge fund. And that was because of getting that one extra layer of unique intellectual property because of building up that knowledge and acumen over time, right? The desire for freedom, legacy, build great relationships with spouse, children, friends, right? So if you can help people be better at relationships, cultivate better relationships, gain relationships, make relationships last, right? There's always going to be a value market for that. And grow closer to God, right? People are always searching for spirituality, whether they know it or not. They are, looking for it in astrology signs. They're looking for it in the universe or meditation. They're looking for it in politics, right? Becomes their religion. And people are always going to have, it is hardwired into us to have this yearning for the creator, something bigger than us, right? And so the more that you can fill that void for people, there's always going to be a place for you to give value and impact. And so this is episode 1 of Ignite the Calling, all based around building up your passion, building up what you're good at, building up your belief in yourself that you have the capacity to go and do and build the things that you want to build, and giving frameworks and principles to help you go through the evolutions of growth much faster, right? Anytime we set a goal, we create action, we make some progression, there's something that maybe goes awry, creates difficulty, life, business, you name it, right? It gives us more data points to learn from. We come up with a new vision or plan, and then we evolve forward, right? And so we're always in this loop of, building, growing seasons, right? Summer, winter, fall, spring, right? We are always in these seasons of life. And if we have good frameworks, right? Hopefully I can bring you good frameworks, good principles to help you keep the good seasons growing longer and getting out of the bad seasons or the seasons where we maybe feel lost. We feel not attuned to our purpose, our passion. We're not living into that person that we maybe have seen in the past, like who I used to, this was the person, right? This is the person that lit me up, and I'm not that person anymore. Hopefully with this, I can help you stay within that person longer. So episode 1 done. See episode 2. Peace.